Welcome to the second episode of Queen's PhD Community Initiative Special Podcast, where we discuss sustainability and the UN Sustainability Development Goals, or SDGs, and how they are connected to Queen's University and Kingston community. I am Medwa, a first-year master's student in chemical engineering, and with me here is...
Hi, I'm Netsai Bibunwipa, and I am a first-year PhD student in geological engineering at Queen's University.
And today we will be talking about the City of Kingston and the organization's views towards sustainability and the UN SDGs with our special guest, Mayor Brian Paterson. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Mayor Paterson. So before we dive deep into this, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the city?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me as part of this discussion. I think it's a really, really exciting project. And there's so many things, I think, for us to talk about and to explore about how we can work on these goals locally and, of course, globally as well. In terms of my role, so I've been mayor of Kingston for about 8 years. It's been a privilege to helm the city of Kingston. The city is an organization of more than 1,500 employees that are across a number of different departments because cities do a lot of different things. We take care of everything from garbage collection and snow plowing to parks to running city facilities. But we're also doing more and more community work and more partnerships in terms of how we can address social concerns, environmental issues. And so that sustainability space we're talking about is something that I think as a city is spending more and more time in about how we can collaborate with the community to improve everyone's quality of life.
Yeah, so as you said, today we're going to be talking about sustainability, but what does sustainability mean for you in the city of Kingston?
So a number of years ago, we actually developed as a city and as a community a vision for being the most sustainable city in Canada. And I remember at that point that there was a lot of discussion on what that definition of sustainability would be. We definitely tried to take a more holistic approach. So often when you hear of sustainability, some people would think of only environmental, and don't get me wrong, I think that's a critical part. But I think right from the outset, I think as a city, we see sustainability as touching social aspects, economic aspects, cultural aspects. It really is about, I think, if I was just thinking at the top of my head, about promoting quality of life for everyone in the community. And of course, when you think of quality of life, that has many different dimensions to it. Right? It's obviously it's environmental quality, but it's also social cohesion and economic prosperity and security and housing and just everything that is around you. So I think sustainability really is multifaceted, and so obviously the Sustainability Development Goals have that characteristic, which I think is something that I appreciate and agree with.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a lot of different areas of sustainability right now. Can you provide some examples of what the city and its residents do to promote sustainability?
Yeah, for sure. So if I was to start on the environmental front, obviously we've one of our key priorities as a city is demonstrating leadership on climate action. So that's really a commitment to electrification, to energy efficiency, to transit, ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, in ways that we can across our community. But also on other fronts, on a social and health front, promoting healthy citizens. And sometimes that's the way we're designing cities now, creating more walkable cities, encouraging, just healthy lifestyles, investing in green spaces and parks. Why do we do that? Because we want people to go out and we want them to be active. We want them to be healthy. To the economic side. So obviously, economic security is very important as well. So as a city working to attract good employers that offer good paying jobs in our community. And making sure that we have a labor force that's growing, that's engaged, that people from all different backgrounds can find exciting career opportunities here. And then on the housing front as well, right? On sustainability and housing front. So how do we design a city where we're not promoting suburban sprawl, right, where people are just living further and further out from the core, and you've got to drive everywhere. But how do we ensure that we've got the kind of living environments that are healthy, an urban forest, is something else that we're looking at. So, but also just walkable and being able to get to where you want to go, and not necessarily having to be too car dependent on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But there are a lot of things to think about, right? So,
There are a lot of
Yeah.
things to think
Yeah,
about.
it's not easy to just,
yeah.
No, it's very complex, but I think more now than in the past. I think that there's a better understanding at a leadership level about how everything is integrated and connected to everything else. It used to be that, we would talk about, what can we do for economic development over here, and then over here, what can we do to help, with social services for, for lower income households and individuals in the community. And then over here, okay, what can we do to help promote the environment? And I think now we understand everything integrates, right? That creating a healthy community, you've got to be working on all different fronts all at the same time. Because if you're ignoring one or two fronts and only focusing on one or the other, you're not going to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, that's absolutely very true. So the city has a very prominent role, right? So as a person in authority, what would you say is the role of the municipalities in actually achieving, X number of SDGs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's two categories of things. There's things that the city directly does, right? So when it comes to, providing transit, obviously designing a really good transit system that people want to use, right? That's not just a system that people use if they have to, but something that's actually attractive and convenient, and people want to leave their cars at home and take our transit system. That's a good example of where, as a city, we've made major investments in our transit system over the last number of years to help facilitate that. Or when it comes to zoning and planning out where the city is going to develop, well, we have a definite role in terms of planning out what does the future of the city look like, our policies, what kind of development, what kind of housing do we want to see. So I think there's stuff that the city does. And then there's also things that the city can facilitate and help to communicate. And I think that speaks to our bigger role, is that it's not just what the city's doing, but how do we work with partners, and how do we encourage and facilitate other work. So I'll give you a good example. So a couple years ago, we launched a climate community action fund. And this wasn't what the city was going to do. We basically just set up a way that private citizens could actually donate money towards a community fund that other nonprofit organizations in the city could access if they had something in mind that they wanted to do to promote sustainability. So we had one food provider, they wanted to buy an electric vehicle for all of their food deliveries to their clients. We have another one that's wanting to promote more sustainable, solar panels on the roof, or more sustainable practices in their building when they're working with clients. They could never afford to do that because, nonprofits, generally speaking, money is tight, and so they're just very focused on their clients. Whereas this was a community fund where here's a few $1,000 we can give you to go and make that investment. So that's not something we're not doing that work, but we're facilitating it. We're basically just connecting people in our community that care about climate change with organizations that want to do something about climate change that just need some funding. And so being able to make those connections, that's a key part of what the city does. We just help to create partnerships between businesses, between agencies, between private citizens, between neighborhood groups, so that we can all work on building the community together.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Facilitation and partnerships, and I think that's key. We can go back to that in a bit, but something that I was just thinking of is that you've been mayor for 8 years, as you said. So we're seeing like all of this awareness around, not just climate development in all its forms, right? So economic and social as well. So how would you say it kind of changed for the city back, when you started all the way here?
That's a really good question. I could probably give you a more thoughtful answer if I brainstorm on it for a while. But I'm going to tell you one thing that comes to mind. The pandemic really changed our thinking, and I'll give you an example why. The pandemic forced very diverse sectors of our community to come together. Like, I remember sitting in meetings where we had business people, public health officials, social service agencies. Like, it was crazy. I'd never seen all these different people all around the same table because, again, we used to kind of work independently on our own different sectors. But But the pandemic created a real challenge where the public health concerns were affecting everybody at the same time. And we were suddenly seeing that, okay, we actually need to help each other, because if a business closes, then those employees will lose their jobs, and then they will need social assistance. So on the other hand, if we can make sure we're working with the social service agencies to keep people safe and healthy, then they're going to be able to show up for work and keep the business going. It was just amazing to see the integrated approaches that were required. And I think that changed our thinking. And I think, to be honest, one of the things I say is that even with the pandemic kind of receding, and now we're kind of in that post-pandemic period, that the last thing that I would want to see is to go back to that siloed thinking we used to have. And to be honest, I'm cautiously optimistic that now our viewpoints have changed. And so I think that integrated approach comes more naturally to us because we were forced to do it during the pandemic.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes a really big issue in order to, highlight some very important things.
You got it.
And then once you know how important these things are, and how much more efficient the work can be, especially with resource allocation, I would say, then I don't think you can ever go back, as you said.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about what you hope to achieve in the next 2, 3, 4 years, I would say. In terms of the SDGs in the city?
For sure. So City Council right now is at a pretty key point. So we had an election last fall. So you have myself and a very new council at the beginning of our 4-year term. So we tend to kind of operate in those 4-year segments. And one of the things that we will be doing shortly is gathering together as a group to decide what our priorities are going to be. So we call it strategic planning, but really it's priority setting. And the way we look at it is that we've only got so many dollars to work with, because obviously we want to make sure that we're living within our means, and given the cost of living pressures that people are facing, obviously we can't just raise taxes as much as we want. We understand that we've got a certain amount of funds over the next 4 years to work with. So where do we want those funds to go? And the thing is, when you're doing priority setting, you can't do everything. That's the whole idea of priority setting. So what are we going to say yes to, and what are we going to say no to, or not yet to? So I think that, to be honest, I don't want to prejudge exactly what's going to come out of that, but I expect that there will definitely be a focus on continued investment in renewable energy, certainly on our climate action piece. I'm sure there's going to be a huge focus on housing. For us, as a community, building enough housing, creating enough housing that's attainable, that's affordable for people, I think that's going to be a big focus for us. I also think that, certainly on the social front, social isolation was something that so many people experienced over the pandemic, and I think we have a better appreciation now for creating new community spaces, outdoor or indoor, where people can gather and build relationships, and just that's an important part of health, right? So that health element will be key. I think that there will also be certainly a focus on on the economic social piece. One of the things that we're seeing is an addictions and mental health crisis. We're seeing our healthcare system locally under strain. We have thousands of people that do not have a family doctor, and the situation is getting worse. So there's a lot of pressure on these healthcare pieces. And as a city, that's not our role as a city, and yet as a community, we can see that's the need. So we're stepping in, and we're trying to partner and facilitate in ways that we never would have done before. So I think that all those pieces, I think, are gonna show up in our priority setting. And but again, it's how do we meet as many needs as we can? How do we create opportunities for everyone to be able to succeed and thrive? And what are those investments that we can make?
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a question I was thinking about, is that how do you kind of set these priorities? So how can you say like one is more important than the other based on, what metric, I would say, if you would use that? Or is it just, what the majority thinks is a good metric?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Well, I think in to some degree, this is somewhat connected to a role in democracy, because every one of us that was elected or re-elected last fall spoke to thousands and thousands of people, knocking on doors, talking to people what their concerns are. And so I think that the reason why we do this priority setting early in the new term is that it's still fresh in our minds, right? Like I still have very clear memories of some of the conversations I had with people at the door about what was important to them, what matters to them. And so that's what I'm carrying into this priority setting. So you ask, where do those priorities come from? I think that they do come from the community. The other thing that I will say is that, Kingston is a diverse city in the way that we think. And so it's created a diverse group of people. So I think out of the mix, the nice thing is that when you've got 13 people that are all going to gather together, we're all going to emphasize certain things. And so I think what I expect out of that mix is a fairly balanced approach, not unlike what you see with sustainability development goals. I imagine that there's going to be certain projects that are very much, how do we build more economic opportunities? And there's absolutely going to be work on how do we promote more environmental sustainability and renewable energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there's absolutely going to be lots of space on investing in more subsidized housing for lower income individuals and other addictions and mental health supports. So I think that this broad range that we've been talking about how you need to invest in a number of different areas, I think that that's actually going to happen organically. I don't think that we're going to have a priority setting session that's only going to be focused on one thing, because I think we all understand it's got to be a holistic approach.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. You mentioned some priorities that the people were talking about. Can you mention a few examples?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I mean, far and away, the number one thing I heard at the door was housing. Far and away. Right? And I'm not surprised by that. That's become a huge issue in the city because we don't have enough housing, and that's caused housing prices to rise dramatically over the last couple of years. And, I just think that there's more and more younger people in our community that just don't even see what the pathway is for them to be able to afford a home. So I think that that's going to have to be a key focus for us as well. Obviously, other input that I got, certainly on just community building as a whole. So some people would have thoughts about, it would be nice to have a new park in our neighborhood, or certainly on the healthcare front. I heard from many people that have lost their family doctor. Their family doctor has retired or is about to retire, and what can the city do to help attract new family doctors? So housing, healthcare, economic opportunities. The homelessness issue, which again is very much integrated with healthcare and addictions and mental health. I heard a lot of questions and comments about that. I think people concerned about, the most vulnerable in our community, and how do we support them and how do we get them back on their feet. So those are just a few of the things. I mean, sometimes people will come up with really interesting thoughts or ideas just related to their particular neighborhood or their particular street, which is always fun too, right? Because Kingston's a very diverse community, and so you hear different things, but lots of overarching pieces that I think confirmed for me what I thought were the biggest issues. I think that it's definitely a lot of people are thinking about these things.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, I think, to me at least, is that a lot of these, main problems, I would say, that are shared with most people are actually shared with a lot of different cities in Canada as well.
Exactly.
So, for example, like with
Especially
London,
housing.
especially housing.
It's interesting that you say that, because that was probably the number one takeaway that I had from this past election as well. It used to be that a lot of the issues that would come up were a little bit more Kingston specific, like a debate about whether or not we should, build the new Waban crossing, or that's very Kingston specific issue, or should we build the Leon Center, right? That's a very Kingston specific issue. So it was very common for the major issues to be very much specific to Kingston. But you're right, every issue that has come up is being experienced by almost every other city across the province, and it's interesting. So I tell people that. I think people understand that. At the same time, what it's created is a vision, certainly that I would like to champion, is that, okay, well, if Kingston is facing the same challenges as every other city, the solutions, if we can find ways to be able to move the needle here in Kingston, find ways to be able to solve or at least be able to improve the situations here, whatever we can do here can probably be applied in other cities and other communities as well. So there's a real leadership opportunity, I think, for Kingston. I think we're just designed by I think, we're just perfectly positioned with our size to be very innovative, to be a laboratory, to be a city of pilot projects where we test drive certain things. And if it works in Kingston, it will work anywhere, and it will work everywhere. So I think that actually is the way we should be focusing on, right? These are difficult problems. Everyone's facing them. What can we cook up here locally, right, that we can try out here and then be able to launch it elsewhere?
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, even if, so sometimes you can harness your city's own strengths in order to fix a certain problem, but it's also interesting to see, can we, find a strength that every city can actually harness, seeing as, it's a common problem.
For sure.
So we talked a lot about kind of the challenges and the issues. Can we talk a little bit about the highlights and some strengths that are unique to Kingston, at least?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is our people, the talent we have here. So, I think like the Queen's Community PhD initiative, I think, is a perfect example of that. Like the Mayor's Innovation Challenge that I'm running in a couple of weeks. Again, it's very much city, university level collaboration that I think is to some degree unique. Certainly, this doesn't happen in a lot of other communities. So I think that there's real power to that. So that would be one thing that I would highlight. Certainly, I think that the history that we have here, the natural and the cultural heritage that we have here. And I know that that's the sustainability development goals speak to that. So I think that that's something that's very unique to Kingston. I think it's a real asset that we have. Our waterfront, right? We have a lot of natural assets that other communities don't have. So how do you capitalize that to attract new residents, to be able to help bring in investment dollars that we can help then to help areas of our community that need more assistance. So I think that I think that would certainly come to mind as well. I also think our geographic location is unique. So one of the things which was interesting, we did a study a few years ago. Kingston is the only city in Canada, or even in North America, with the population that we have within a 3-hour radius, because of course you've got Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa and Syracuse. Like if you just put the number of people that are in a 3-hour radius, I think we're something like number 1 or number 2 on the continent in terms of the number of people there. So I think that there's something very strategic about our location, being able to touch a number of different areas and very large population centers around us. So those are a few things that kind of come to mind. But again, I think our people, I think our institutions, and I think that the other thing is our size. And when I say that, I think that there is something very powerful about a medium-sized city facing the challenges of the 21st century. We are large enough that there's many different sectors and many different people working on many different things. So we're big enough to have that, but we're also small enough that we can bring everybody to the same table. So it kind of speaks to that partnership collaboration piece you were talking about earlier. I think if you were a very large urban center, it would be very difficult to bring everyone around the table. There's just too many people. It's just too hard to be able to coordinate that. Whereas in Kingston, right, we can actually bring all industry and sector leaders together around one table. And the power of that, right, about how these integrated approaches that we think we need, I think that Kingston is a better place to be able to do it and then be able to show the power of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So going back to partnerships again and collaborations, so how do you think, or how should I phrase it, what's the most important role that these collaborations can make? Because like the 17th SDG talks literally about just collaborations and how important that is. So what do you think is the most important role of these collaborations?
It's interesting. It was actually during the pandemic, and I remember that someone showed me some research. I think it had been done out of Stanford University that showed that the most resilient communities, the communities that are able to recover the most from challenges like the pandemic, are ones where there's cross-sector collaboration. It was really interesting to me. I'm like, so it's interesting that I think we already had a base of that, and I think it got much stronger during the pandemic. What's the value of it? if you have somebody in one sector that is facing a challenge and they've been dealing with that challenge for a long period of time, you just naturally over time see it one way. But when you bring in somebody from a different sector with a very different background, they can see the problem in a totally different way and suddenly unlocks a creative idea that you otherwise wouldn't have thought of on your own. I saw that time and time again during the pandemic, but I've seen it since too, where you bring different people around the table so you see things differently, and you can also bring different assets to the table. So, for example, when it's come to dealing with some of the addiction and mental health challenges, well, there are a number of agencies that have been focused on this issue and helping vulnerable people. As a city, so they bring the expertise about how to help people. They're the ones that are experts in how to manage the day-to-day living challenges of that. But as a city, we're experts in land and property and space. And so what we did was the city started to work with our agencies and created a space in a building where we could then have the experts come and be able to work directly with the individuals. Now, the city couldn't do that on our own. We don't know. We don't have the expertise in how to be able to deal with some of the trauma and the issues that people are dealing with. But we were able to specialize in our expertise, and the agencies were able to specialize in their expertise, and you're able to do something new that we never saw before. So I think that's the other key thing, is that when everyone understands and respects each other, that we're all bringing our own assets and expertise, and we're not trying to do what we're not good at. Right? We all bring what we're good at to the table, and then you assemble like a jigsaw puzzle. You just put those pieces together, and suddenly you create something that works financially, it works in terms of location, it works in terms of staffing, it works in terms of messaging and communications, all those pieces, because everyone's bringing their expertise to the table.
But something that's very interesting to me is that this is bound to have some clashes. So a looming question that all through this journey, with every single interview we've done, there's this one looming question or idea, so a little bit of context is that sustainability has 3 pillars, which is economic, social, and environmental. Mm-hmm. And then with all these community partners, right, or collaborations in general, everyone has their own, view of the issue. Mm-hmm. And then, so in general, just because I think old habits die hard, that the economic side is mostly overshadowing the other 2 sides. And while there is a lot of awareness and there is a lot of actions being taken towards, strengthening the other sides and giving them more importance, but then how are the weights allocated in terms of importance? So where's the line drawn, I would say?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I tend to think that if we're envisioning sustainability as a pie and like trying to divide it into different sections, that's naturally going to lead to a lot of conflict and clashing, right? Because I think that people approach the sustainability conversation with their own biases, which is one they are closest to. I think that that's just natural. And I mean, your point about, maybe economics is overshadowing it. I don't know. From my perspective, I don't necessarily see that. I see that as the community partners that I work with, I would say there's an even mix, right? So I've got some people that come very much from a, environmental prioritization, others that come from social prioritization, others that come from economic prioritization. And part of the work of putting people around the table is to understand everyone else's piece matters. That's the first part. And then the second part is to say, okay, are there ways that we can see that investing in the environmental part actually helps the economic and the social? And by investing in the social, that actually helps the economic and the environmental. I think that's the key. It's not easy. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy. And to be honest, it's probably easier just not to have those conversations. So I don't think that we should be afraid of conflict. I actually think that you need it. My biggest concern is when conflict means that we're not talking to one another anymore. And then we're back to our siloed approach, all working in our own spheres. I think we actually have to be more courageous to actually kind of sit around the same table and actually challenge each other's thoughts and views and perspectives. And then out of that, then you come up with approaches that actually make more sense. So as an example, one of the decisions we made as a city is that the economic sector we would pursue is sustainable manufacturing, where we're growing, electric vehicle production, and why are we doing this? Because, right, not only does it make sense environmentally, but we also see that there's economic benefits. So now, not only are we helping to create economic opportunities, but we're actually developing manufacturing sector that's helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the community. It works on both, right? The social side, right? Economic and social. Yeah, do they conflict? Well, yes and no. I think that the social service agencies are understanding that, okay, in order to be able to do more to help our lower income households, our most vulnerable residents, we need funding. Well, where's that funding going to come from? Sure, we'd love it to come from upper levels of government, but what can we do locally? Okay, well, if we have a strong economic sector that can be generating then tax revenues here locally that we can then channel into some of those social programs, then actually we can see that there's a benefit both ways. And the same thing on the economic side. The economic side, all I'm hearing from businesses is they need people to work. Okay, well, we have individuals that right now, they need social supports and assistance to be able to get them back on their feet so they can become great employees that can then work for these businesses. So I'm just saying that these conversations take time to be able to flush out. Is there conflict? Yes, initially. But if we talk through the conflict and we push and challenge each other, then I think you actually come up with approaches that actually can benefit all.
I'm going to challenge this idea a little bit more, if that's
You can.
okay.
Go for it. Let's do it.
Okay, so you're saying that, we're investing in one area in order to, help the other areas as well. But how far can we actually take it, and when is it actually warranted or acceptable to invest in one area even though it's hurting the others? So I'll give you an example. Just something I've seen recently is that so Kingston has, it's next to the lake, so they're planning on getting, I think there's a poker run or something like this, and there's floating hotels, something like this, that they're planning on doing, or that's an idea that they're pursuing, even though there's a lot of, there's a lot of voiced concern about the environment, which is very warranted, I think, because this will bring in a lot of money, which is great, but there is voiced concern about the environment as well. Which is understandable, I think, and you can't please everyone, right? But as well, like when is it acceptable, or when do you when is it okay to actually take the decision that it's fine if it's hurting the other sectors, but we kind of need this right now? Like, where's that golden mean at, or if there is a golden mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I actually totally agree with what you're saying. And to be honest, my prior comments don't suggest that, there's a perfect solution, a perfect balance to everything. There isn't. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's lots of times where we have to make those decisions about what's more important. And so, for example, on the housing front, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing as a city right now is we need new housing. But to build new housing, we may have to remove green space. Mm-hmm. We may have to tear down trees. So how do you create that balance, right? You're, on the one hand, right, it's housing, which is really, really important for people's quality of life and for the economy and for people to have a place to live. On the other hand, there's an environmental cost to that. So yes, absolutely, we encounter those things all the time. So what do you do with those? Well, to be honest, you need to look at every case on its merits. And you need a chance for both sides to be able to voice the perspectives and to make sure that at least all considerations are out on the table. I think that the biggest concern I would have is where a decision is being made without all of the evidence in front of us, right? So if one side, for whatever reason, maybe is traditionally the voice that is louder, right? And that carries the day, that's a problem, right? So we want to make sure that obviously both perspectives are heard. And then we say, okay, is there an ability to compromise? Is there some way? And sometimes there isn't. You're right. But it might mean that there's, case A and case B. Maybe case A, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to say yes to case A. We're going to say no to case B because overall we're trying to create more of that balance. Sure, that can absolutely happen. And that's just like kind of that's the real world decision making that you have to engage in. That being said, I think that you can still move in a certain direction over time. So your example of the poker run, right? That's been going on for many, many, many years. It used to be that there was never any voicing of any of the environmental concerns. I never even would have thought twice about it. Now there's actually a lot more thinking about, okay, is there a different direction that we need to go as a community, right? So let's have those conversations. But that gets back to my earlier point. The most important point is we're having the conversations, not going into our polar opposite camps where we're not talking to each other. And that, I think, is the biggest concern that I see as a community leader, is the biggest danger is that we just stop listening to each other. And we only listen to people that reinforce our own points of view.
Yeah, that's very true. I'll stop probing into that point.
No, it's actually, I'm glad you raised it because it is true. And you're right. I mean, sometimes when we have these high level discussions, we can make it seem like everything is easy and we just need to work together, but it's not. It's hard. And quite frankly, you're going to win some and you're going to lose some, right? That's one of the lessons I've learned as being mayor for 8 years. I've been on council for 12, is that there's decisions that have been made that I've agreed with, and there are decisions that I made that I've disagreed with. Well, that just shows that there's different points of view that are being weighed out, and that's probably for the best, right? It just shows that as a community, we're trying to take a balanced approach, and it's messy and it's hard, and not everyone always comes out of it agreeing with the decision, but at least we're having all points of view heard and weighed out best we can.
Yeah, that's very true. One lesson I would like to put forth is that, taught by someone that's very dear to me, is that everything in life is a trade-off. So I see this to be very true in my mundane decisions. So I can only imagine how prominent this is in, on a municipal level and even, country level.
Yeah.
So that's totally understandable.
Yeah, no, I mean, it goes back to earlier discussions about priority setting that council's going to do. Not everything can be a priority. There are going to be some things we're going to have to say no to. Yeah, for sure. We're going to say yes to as many things as we can, obviously. And we're going to be creative, we're going to be open, we're going to think, we're going to hear from everybody. We're going to look at ways that we can collaborate, and maybe we can do more if we're partnering with other institutions. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's also going to be no. Where we're like, no, this isn't a priority because there's other things that are important. And I think some of the issues that we're facing now as a community, to say, yeah, we're going to do this and this is going to have to wait. But the process matters, and at least people feel that we at least have weighed it out and thought about it, and not dismissed it out of hand, right? Then I think that at least helps a bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely very true. So the last thing I would want to wrap up with is that, is there a certain SDG that you are particularly, personally, passionate about?
Well, I mean, I think as mayor, I couldn't not be passionate about the goal around building sustainable cities and sustainable communities. I just think that there's so much there, and I think what excites me about that goal is that it sees cities as the future. Right? I mean, you look at the trends over the last, number of decades, and you see the increased urbanization around the world. Let's face it, we're continuing in a direction where most people are going to experience most of their lives in a city. And so for me, right, for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we create a city and a community that people are proud of, that people love, that is enriching, that, adds to quality of life. And how do we preserve what we have that's good, and how do we improve what is not so good, right? And I think that's something that I couldn't help but put that one forward first.
Yeah, that's well, I kind of expected that. Spoken like a true mayor.
Yeah, that's right.
So, any last words you'd like to, conclude the podcast with?
Yeah, or something you want to talk or say to us Queen students?
Well, first of all, thank you for the chance to talk about this. I think this is awesome, and thank you for your energy and your creativity. And I'm saying this to you guys, but to everyone who's listening and to the student body as a whole. That I come back to my earlier comment. It's our people that's our biggest asset, because the challenges that we're facing are hard. And it's going to require creative thinking and creative ideas. And where do those creative ideas and creative thinking come from? It comes from great people, right? It comes from you guys. It comes from the student body. So don't be afraid to pitch forward those ideas. Don't be afraid to share them, because who knows if the idea in your head is actually going to be the one that's going to help to make a huge difference in the lives of many other people in our city, our community, and the country, and the world as a whole. So let's keep working together.
Great.
Yes, so thank you so much for being here again, and thank you for giving us so much insight about the city and the SDGs and what we can do with them and what's been being done with them. And thank you for the listeners for listening all the way through. I hope that this episode inspired you to become more mindful of the SDGs, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.